was the Desert Rose, the elegant First Lady bringing reform, and so forth.
Asma al-Assad was once the glamorous First Lady of Syria, admired and poised. Unfortunately, that life crumbled, turning her into a woman in exile. What really happened behind the closed doors of the Assad regime? At one time, Asma seemed to be living a fairy tale with her husband, Bashar al-Assad, but war shattered that illusion. Rumors surfaced, suggesting that she was detached from the suffering of her people. As the conflict escalated, Asma and her family had to flee the country. Now in exile, questions linger. What drove her away? Why the controversies? What is her life like now? Stay tuned as we uncover all of this and more in this video, the beginning of the end. Asma al-Assad, the wife of Syria's President Bashar al-Assad, was receiving so much backlash for her silence during the initial phases of the social chaos in Syria. It felt like she was completely off the radar, and people were patiently waiting for her to condemn the protests and the violence that was emerging everywhere around her. After all, she had been one of the most vocal women's rights activists in education for women, but she was just unusually bothered about it. So much so that it took her nearly a year, in February 2012, to come out of her shell and offer her first official statement to the press. In her email to The Times, she went into detail, explaining why she had been silent. She explained that her husband, the president, was the leader of all Syrian citizens, and her first duty as his wife was to stand by him. She did not stop there. She also highlighted what she had done for charity, assisting with rural development projects and helping the people affected by the terror and violence in her country. However, many did not buy this because it felt like a publicity stunt. In light of these new events, Asma was criticized, especially as she was condemned as a hypocrite. But Reem Alaf, an associate fellow at Chatham House, noted that Asma's stance shouldn't surprise anyone because she hardly meddled in political affairs. Even if she desperately wanted to change the situation and maybe had a talk with her husband, she would not have been able to change anything. Subsequently, the European Union, on the 23rd of March 2012, made a big move to try and force the Syrian government to stop the violent actions against protesters. The EU blacklist included 12 Syrian individuals. Among them was the wife of the president of the Syrian Arab Republic, Asma al-Assad. Her assets and accounts were also frozen, along with several of Assad's relatives, who were forbidden to visit the European Union. Still, Asma's British citizenship may have enabled her to visit the United Kingdom and maintain the right to do so. But did that happen? You may as well be wondering what series of events led to the Assad's ban. Sit back and let's rewind to the beginning of the Syrian war and the role Assad played in all of this. The beginning of the war and controversies. The war in Syria started before the 26th of January, 2011. It was a lot like the Arab Spring protest. Following that, other protests took place in February of the same year. These protests had one aim: change. They had a lot of support from pro-democracy protesters in Egypt, Tunisia, and Libya. Unfortunately, these early protests were put down when the Syrian security force arrested several people. However, things shifted in early March 2011 when Syrian police began arresting kids for graffiti writing on anti-government in the southern town of Daraa. This caused a general upset among people and resulted in more protests all over Syria as the people cried and called for political change, civil liberty, and ending the state of emergency, which had existed since 1963. Unfortunately, the results of this protest did not turn out well. The Syrian government suppressed these protests and responded with police brutality, and by the 24th of March, 2011, many protesters had their lives taken. Now, you would have expected the president to take a different approach to the matter. But what did he do? The first public response of President Bashar al-Assad was a speech he delivered on the 30th of March, 2011, where he asserted that the national unrest was due to a conspiracy launched by foreign forces and claimed that protesters were actively involved in treachery. This was the most shocking news of the century. The nation was in a rumble, and the protesters were stunned to their bones. They couldn't believe their president would turn against them in that manner, but he did. The international community was quick to act, coming down hard on the Syrian government in 2011. In April of the same year, the United States decided to bring limited measures against the Assad government. This was succeeded by the order from the former President of America, Barack Obama, on the 18th of May, 2011, who sanctioned 7 personalities, and among them was Bashar Assad. Canada soon followed suit and sanctioned Syrian leaders, including Assad, on the 24th of May of the same year. In contrast to the promise of the economic liberalization program that Assad made to the people of Syria, what came into play was that most of the beneficiaries were more of Assad's Alawite supporters. They were mostly the ones with the dough who got to invest all the money in the newly privatized economy sector. This pretty much came as a shock to the Syrian public. People were trying to make a living, putting their best efforts into what they needed to, while those in power found a way to somehow distort their efforts. It was as if the regime said, "Listen, boys, we are the ones running this country, and you are simply along for the ride." That's when the resentment started building. The rage and frustration all led to the social chaos in Syria. Well, corruption wasn't the only thing the Assad regime was known for. When his father, Hafez al-Assad, was in office, his government was one of the most brutal dictatorships in the Arab region in the 20th century. This man governed in a really brutal manner. He did not allow anyone to oppose him in any way possible. Then, when his son Bashar took over, he tried to put a new face to it all, mostly because he wanted to make the regime look more modernized. So he started laying off all the older men who had worked with his father and remained loyal to him during his regime, replacing them with younger and more trustworthy Alawites. However, the problem was that Bashar was just swapping these loyal Alawites with another group of loyalists because he wanted to remain in power. The only way to do this was to ensure no opposition from his inner circle. That was a smart move from his end. You would have thought that with the change in positions of authority in Bashar's regime, things would have looked a little different, but his regime started taking advantage of sectarianism. It used it to exploit the differences between religious groups and inadvertently used it to control them. With Assad's reign, Syria's government became increasingly domineering. They even refused to grant an opportunity for human rights organizations and independent organizations to perform their functions. This indirectly meant nobody could cross-check their actions. That wasn't all of it. The government went on to ban face veils at universities, which is quite a pretty big thing for many Syrian women. However, when the Syrian revolution began, Assad decided to partially lift the veil ban. Nonetheless, it was all an attempt to bring them to a calm state so they would feel he was trying to find a solution to the issue. Another smart move, right? What is even more fascinating is how eagerly Assad was trying to rebuild his image within the country and worldwide. For the last 5 years, they had been striving to get this image in the market and were beginning to succeed. They were in many nice articles, ranging from fashion to celebrities, as if they were preparing all the ingredients necessary for cooking an almost fairy tale appearance while trying to distract the world from what their rule looked like. Then, just as the Assad regime was preparing to bash its political opponents, which led to the demise of close to 10,000 Syrians, Vogue decided to put up a flattering post about Asma. Can you believe it? Vogue ran this pretty convincing profile of Asma al-Assad, seemingly titled A Rose in the Desert by Joan Juliet Buck. The article was mostly criticized for being positive or Orientalist. It described Syria as a place that had no bombings, unrest, or kidnappings, due to the regime's constant scrutiny of its citizens and foreigners. Surprisingly, it did not say a word about the forced disappearances and human rights violations that took place under Bashar Assad's rule. As if that was not enough, the article also referred to the Assad family as wildly democratic, which is quite ironic given how autocratic and oppressive the regime was. Subsequently, the article was taken down, but not after it had generated much controversy. Subsequent to our interview, as the terrible events of the past year and a half unfolded in Syria, it became clear that its priorities and values were completely at odds with those of Vogue. The escalating atrocities in Syria are unconscionable, and we deplore the actions of the Assad regime in the strongest possible terms. However, the cat was let out of the bag, and allegedly, the New York Times reported that the Assad family paid the Washington public relations firm $5,000 monthly to keep communication between Vogue magazine and the First Lady, Asma al-Assad. The fact that Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad was painted so well in Western media was not sheer luck. The Assads had hired influential public relations consultants who had dealt with Clinton, Bush, and Thatcher. These advisors assisted the Assads in creating what can best be described as a perfect appearance, as the pair were presented as modern, progressive, and even fashionable. In a new twist of events, it was allegedly found that Asma al-Assad, wife to the president of Syria, had been attempting to make her image look better and even hired Bell Pottinger. According to Tim Bell, Mrs. Assad wanted to be among the first club of First Ladies who organized annual meetings for First Ladies worldwide. However, Bell Pottinger did not arrange interviews with Mrs. Assad. Rather, he offered her help establishing a communications office in Damascus to manage her persona. Asma al-Assad's image transformation was quite extraordinary. A few years after she got into the seat, she started finding her way into the positive national and international media articles. Paris Match called her an element of light in a country full of shadow zones, and the Eastern Diana. French Elle magazine presented her as one of the most stylish women in world politics. In 2009, the Huffington Post published an article and fashion slideshow titled Asma al-Assad, Syria's First Lady and All-Natural Beauty. All these features presented Asma al-Assad as the modern fashionable wife of the president and an influential First Lady. Joan Juliet Buck, the author of the Vogue article A Rose in the Desert, later criticized the Assad regime herself. In July 2012, she wrote a piece for the Daily Beast, calling Bashar al-Assad a brutal leader. A month later, in the same light, Buck wrote another article full of criticisms in The Telegraph in August 2012, but this time, it was about Asma al-Assad. Buck threatened the First Lady, accusing her of being the accomplice of the regime's war, and called her the First Lady of Hell. Buck later pointed out that she never called it a rose in the desert, while implying that Vogue may have been trying to put a more positive spin on the regime of Bashar Assad. I didn't want to write the piece, but I always finished what I started. I handed it in on the 14th of January, the day President Ben Ali fled Tunisia. The Arab Spring is spreading, I told American Vogue on the 21st of January. You might want to hold the piece. They didn't think the Arab Spring was going anywhere, and the piece was needed for the March Power issue. On the 25th of February, as Libyan protesters demanded an end to Gaddafi, my piece on Asma al-Assad went online at Vogue.com. They had excruciatingly titled it, A Rose in the Desert.
And his family members have arrived in Moscow, and Russia is providing them with asylum. That's according to a source in the Kremlin. It had been the case that Russia had told us that Assad had left.
How is it that authority left the hands of the most feared president? Well, do you know how Syria has been in a brutal civil war for over a decade? In a shocking turn of events, rebel groups seized the country without any resistance. This was the last of the 13-year fight that destroyed the nation and resulted in the loss of many people's lives. Now, you can imagine how awkward this has got to be for Vladimir Putin, who has heavily invested his finances in supporting the Assad government. Russia had invested millions of dollars in supporting the Assad government. Allegedly, their air force also helped bomb Syria to keep Assad in power. Nonetheless, all these efforts failed, and the regime of Assad was overthrown. Now, in a move that would cause an uproar around the globe, Russia has provided political asylum for Assad and his family. From the look of things, they have provided for more. According to reports, the Assads are already in Moscow, where they are to be provided with political asylum. This might as well be a Cinderella story for a family that once dominated Syria and wielded almost unchecked political authority. What is even more surprising is the lavish spending of the Assad family. At least 20 luxurious apartments have been bought in Moscow with their estimated $2 billion fortune, which could be their escape route. Though this might be an investment, there are speculations that it might be because the family has close relations with Russia.
Of the Assad regime, and it seems as though right now As Assad has fallen, they have now allowed for him to come here to Moscow and stay here. This really came after a day on Sunday where the whereabouts of the former Syrian leader were very much unknown, very much in question. The rebels.
Their extravagant expenditure does not end there either. The extravagance of the Assad family's lifestyle can be judged by their secret palace in Syria. The palace's construction was initiated in 1976, and no compromises were made in building the structure. For instance, the building comes with Italian marble tiles, which are believed to have cost around $10.6 million per room. Talk about opulence! It could also be noted that most of the money this family has accumulated over the years remains hidden from the public or free from any public scrutiny through offshore accounts. Asma al-Assad was groomed as the face of the nation, an elegant and refined woman with a high education and decent background. However, her real life must be very different. You may recall that Vogue article we mentioned earlier that depicted her as the desert rose and, by all means, a humble first lady. Well, it now sings a different tune, and that was just a calculated image they constructed. In 2012, WikiLeaks leaked several private papers that portrayed Asma al-Assad as an utterly materialistic woman. The wife of Bashar al-Assad, Asma al-Assad emerged as a jewelry and shoes freak. She purchased $7,000 crystal-encrusted shoes and spent approximately $350,000 on furnishings for the palace. The family has close associations with Russia, with Bashar's eldest son, Hafez al-Assad, graduating from Moscow State University with a PhD. Given their family link with Moscow's high society, the Assad family is expected to maintain a rich lifestyle during their exile. This is, however, very different from what many expected. Nonetheless, there's one surprising thing she did. She asked her luxury products to be delivered to Dubai to avoid the international ban on dealing with Syria. Talk about finding loopholes. Consequently, anybody who understands and is privy to Asma's unquenchable passion for all things luxurious will appreciate that the lady had no qualms about going overboard. The issue here is to what extent this was done with her husband Bashar al-Assad's approval, or how much of it was initiated by her. It is for these reasons that the Assad regime's actions have left many scars in Syria, with about 13 years of war costing the lives of 600,000 Syrians and displacing 6 million people. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has not only been accused of detaining and torturing people, but he has also been accused of abusing tens of thousands of rebels, employing chemical weapons and Scud missiles, using lethal barrel bombs against civilians, and deliberately attacking hospitals, mosques, bakeries, and other places where individuals are gathered publicly. This is insane and inhumane. The First Lady, Asma al-Assad, did not get public attention initially, and people wondered about her fate. Others thought she could be in a state of denial, driven by the propaganda of the regime, that the insurgents were terrorists sponsored from outside the country. Some considered her more like an involuntary detainee, a person who could neither speak out nor travel beyond the borders with her children. However, 10 months into the conflict, she was seen standing by her husband at a rally in Damascus, supporting his government. While there is still so much uncertainty about what is to come, one thing is certain: the people of Syria deserve a chance to heal. At the same time, we cannot help but wonder what's next for the woman who once held the title of the First Lady of Syria. Are other untold truths lurking behind the curtains we do not know yet? What are your thoughts and opinions on Asma al-Assad's life? Do you believe Assad could have done better as the president of Syria if he wanted to? Feel free to share your views in the comment section. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel. Before you go, explore the other videos displayed on your screen.